Welcome back to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page and also on my YouTube channel, where you can find all of the archive videos of all the past shows. And this is year nine, end of year nine of my podcast show. So I've had so many great guests and topics over the years. So you can go to the YouTube channel, type in your favorite guests, and binge watch those episodes to your heart's content. It's a treasure trove of information relating to spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And on this show, I love exploring the wisdom and the wonder and the healing that's available to us in everyday life. And we're diving today into a topic that touches something deep within all of us: the memories, the impressions, the inner knowings that connect us to the place we came from, what many people call heaven. And our guest today is Jacob Cooper, who's a licensed clinical social worker. He's a best-selling author of Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. He's been on the show before to talk about his near-death experience. So I would refer you to that past show, Life After Breath. And he's also a spiritual teacher who'll be here this summer in Lilydale. We'll talk more about his workshop later on, but he does really focus on helping people to remember their soul's truth and reconnect with the love that exists beyond this physical world. And so in this episode today, connecting with your memories of heaven, he's going to share his insights from his own profound experience and also offer guidance for anyone who feels that subtle pull towards something eternal and familiar and deeply comforting. So thanks for being back on the show today, Jacob.
Oh, a pleasure, Willa. Thank you for having me back on. I think we were just talking in the show. It's been around 2 years since I've
Yeah.
been on your platform. So a big honor and love the work that you do and the message that you're getting out to the masses.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, for people who may be new to your work, can you just share with our listeners today a brief story about your own near-death experience and how it shaped your understanding of heaven?
Yeah, I just celebrated my 36th birthday around a week or two ago. But I'm also celebrating this upcoming September, my 33rd anniversary of my NDE. So to do the math, that would be which wasn't my strong suit, but 3 years old, September of 1993, when I had my NDE. So, and the weird and wild element about it is it feels like it was just yesterday. I just can't believe that was over 3 decades ago. Time is wild these days, and especially as you're getting older, it's like a year feels like a second. But I had my NDE September of 1993 due to a condition called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which for infants, children, and adults could be quite detrimental, and my condition and many other conditions fatal. I know I'm a big part of Edgar Casey's ARE, and I've done many presentations there. I actually have one coming up the day I'm going to be in Lilydale online. I'm mentioning Edgar Casey, and I'll reference him a little bit, but he had a child, I do believe his name was Milton. And his child, I think before around the age of 1 or even before the age of 1 had whooping cough and crossed over due to the condition as a young infant. And later, Milton came in when Casey was doing a reading on a family, and one of the children, was the reincarnate of Milton, and he picked that up during the life reading, from my understanding. But yeah, whooping cough is not something to be taken lightly. I know sometimes when people have upper respiratory stuff, asthma, stuff like that, we just kind of dismiss it and don't understand the severity of it. But, with well, left untreated, it could lead to fatalities. But I had this condition called whooping cough, and I went to, kind of like an innocent day with family, friends, and I went to a playground and I completely suffocated due to this whooping cough. There was nothing possibly to hold to this day. It is the most traumatizing, scariest moment of my life. But by, kind of being like a buffalo, like not running away from the storm, no pun intended with the Lilydale thing in Buffalo, but, I went right towards it, and behind the utmost horror and suffocation and the lowest abyss that, one could experience, and intensified trauma, I was able to have a full crossing over experience and experienced, my own, guardian angels. I was able to have a full-blown awareness of angels that were all around me. I was aware of my higher self, beings. They were part of my soul pod that greeted me, awareness of previous lifetimes that I lived, awareness of the life that I would be living, connection with the eternal creative source of life, which some people concretize as God or, the center of the universe. To me, it goes beyond any descriptive word, and just the utmost euphoric sensations that one could have, as well as love for not your own doing, but love for your inner being. And it's a place that, is forever etched within my own memory that I can never let go of. And so, that's a little bit of the short, pieces that I saw in my NDE. But for disclaimers, it's very hard to put into words. When you think of, this side, the color schemes are based on the colors of the sun. When you're on the other side, there is no sun, but to equate it, much like the planet has a sun, in order for it to continue, the other side's light is really the light of the divine, the light of God. That's really where everything emanates from. So I think, in many ways, the planet is allegorical. If you're really able to study the laws of nature, you're able to understand spiritual principles and how the other side works, just with different frequencies, in different levels, but it's very much symbolic. So I decided in my NDE, well, first of all, I was asked, what would I do, within my NDE, which is more of a niche position. I would, based on research, it's probably around 75% of NDErs are suggested or, perhaps told, hey, it's not your time. There's other things to do. I firmly don't believe that the soul will not do anything that it doesn't agree with, and I do believe the spirit realm honors and understands that. But for whatever reason, I was given autonomy, which is a lot for a 3-year-old to give. I mean, talk about some of the questions that 3-year-olds are asked, to say, hey, should I stay or should I go, as the song says. I was just asked, if I, what will my life look like? What will my body look like? Why am I here? Some of the bigger existential questions that people have, such as who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And I just asked those. And with that, question, I was just shown a lot of premonitions of the work that I'm doing today, such as speaking in front of people, sharing this message, and things of that sort. And so, um, I have a saying these days that says, as beautiful, spiritual transformative experiences, NDEs, all these experiences are great, but there's nothing more expansive than being of service to others. And as Ram Dass says, just, walking each other home. We're all just here in a way to walk each other home. And so that is really the drive of my work. And with that agreement, I said this is more beautiful than heaven itself, giving over heaven to other people, being of service without asking for anything in return, is what I agreed to do. And so with that, everything else dissipated, and I was left with, incredible buyer's remorse after that, where, on the other side, it looks so much better than when you're coming back down, to the hospital bed that I was at. I just said, like, I can't believe I just did this. How will I know all these things would come true? How I know this would all occur? And just my guides left me with this teaching that really is illustrated in a lot of Casey's work, where he says, spirit is life, the mind is the architect, and the physical is the result. But in a sense, the spirit realm really showed me that the power that our own thoughts have, that our own mind have, where we're able to really work with our mind to really design the life that we were, blueprinted before we got here. But when our thoughts are built with trust and built with confidence and working in a higher vibratory field, we could be more in flow with the life that we, intended to live, the life that was designed before we got here. But the mind is an incredible architect and powerful tool, and the physical is that result. And so with that, I woke up in a hospital bed in Long Island, and I've been, trying to make sense out of this, puzzle that was scattered all over the place, and it's taken me, a period of time, but each and every day is another opportunity to understand this puzzle in a more divine way, so to speak. So yeah.
Thank you for that summary. I think that'll help catch people up to the depth of experience that you went through. And then, it's been a process of you really trying to integrate what you saw, what you felt, what you experienced,
Mhm.
what you perceived on deep levels. And it wasn't just memory. I would define that more as like a deeper soul memory that you enter into every time you access that
Mhm.
experience and glean the wisdom and the insight that you have from that. Now, I know that in terms of memories of heaven, you know, what does that mean to you on a practical everyday level? When we have this incredible experience, the near-death experience, as you said, it's transcendent, transformative. But what does that mean to you on a practical everyday level in terms of bringing those memories of heaven into the now?
That's a really wonderful question. I think people speak of heaven as a place that's almost kind of like on your GPS that you could put in and go to. But to me, I've understood that heaven to be an awareness, and something that's capable while you're still in the body. And when I had my NDE, that awareness was filled with love. When I tried to dissect it and analyze it, I saw that it was filled with love, and by love I mean um, I think the Greeks were very much ahead of their time, but they broke down love into many different layers. But this form of love went beyond just, romantic or conditional. It was a love that was completely unconditional, that loved you for your inner being and saw the real you. And that's really what I gathered. And I think ultimately that's something that I try to aspire to, where, all that I encounter, I try to do the best that I can to help to see myself, the real person, from the lens. Some days the human lens is very strong, but then it's really not about being perfect, but about the pivot and really being able to direct and seeing, okay, if I'm looking at this too much from the human lens. And sometimes that's essential. You need to protect yourself. If you're going to look at just the good and not look at the shadow, well, that could be a life that is in jeopardy, so you have to be objective for sure. But I think it's more important on a private basis to really see life at its pure form, which was a big emphasis by, a big teacher in the spirit realm for me. Dr. Wayne Dyer would always, start his workshops off with that orange analogy. And he says, when you take an orange, you squeeze that out, you get orange juice. And we take, each and every one of us out, you squeeze it out, you're left with an eternal, beautiful spirit. And so that's something that I try to do the best that I can. But also, something that Dr. Dyer spoke about, which was he was asked, how to connect to spirit, and he would, how to connect to heaven, how to connect to God. And you would say to really connect to enthusiasm. Again, I'm bringing the Greeks a lot, which I
Mhm.
know Dr. Ray Moody, he coined the term near-death experience, had a doctorate in philosophy and studied all the Greeks too. So there's a real crossover with Greek, philosophy and things of that sort. But, Dr. Dyer would say connecting to enthusiasm is how you connect to the infant, how you connect to spirit, because that word, when you break it down, is has and theos, which means the divine within.
Mhm.
And so when you're connecting to your own passions, you're connecting to your enthusiasm, you're connecting to your joy. So I think that's a very much of a subjective nature. Every person has their own bliss, and I'm sure you probably understand this as, evidential medium better than others, that when people on the other side, they're connecting to the things that they loved over here. That's their heaven. Those are the things that they loved over here, they're continuing over there. So you want to connect to heaven. Don't dismiss the human things that you love. Those are very much mystical and spiritual and eternal. Um, I know in every reading when my grandfather comes forward, he's telling me that he's on my fishing docks behind my house. He's hanging out there. That's something that he loved over here. That was his heaven. And so, I think it's really connecting to heaven is really to really leaning into the things that you love over here. Those are the things that you'll continue over there, I believe, too, as well as the relationships, the love that you experience. There's a beautiful quote that I try to live by, which, is kind of paraphrased by this Indian mystic, but essentially, it says what is real can never change. What changed was never really truly real. And for myself in this reality, everything is constantly changing.
Mhm.
But what is real is that which can never change. And what I've learned, what that which can never change is love. Love is eternal. And the dynamics that we have, the relationships that we have, the growth that we have are all things, that we could take with us, long after, this physical experience. So that's how I try to live, to heaven is really understanding heaven and living my life as if I'm looking, back on it and understanding the values and the things that I know, could continue and create, in a more expansive heaven when I'm, crossed over in a way. I don't try to stay over there because it's not a destination. It's just a field of awareness. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is more accurate to call it a field of awareness.
Mhm.
It's stepping into another dimension of
Yeah.
understanding. And I really enjoy the fact that you brought in that word enthusiasm, because with
Mhm.
my mediumship students, I'm always bold, italicizing, underlining that enthusiasm is a very necessary component to evidential mediumship. It helps to raise the vibration. And
Mhm.
when you can enthusiastically have a conversation with a loved one in spirit,
Mhm.
that joyful center place that you enter makes it very easy. There's a trust. And that is something that we can apply in all of our lives too, not just for
Yeah.
mediumship. So I really enjoy the fact that that's part of this for you as
Mhm.
well. And I'm thinking in terms of people who are wanting to know whether they're experiencing a memory themselves or a resonance from the other side or collecting up those memories from heaven. Are there some subtle signs? I know there are obvious ones like having an NDE and,
Mhm.
and having certain spiritual experiences, but are there some subtle signs that you think people initially should be looking for? Maybe they've dismissed them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of layers, to this thing. A lot of people, this is a great movie, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, uh, James Van Praagh might have been a part of the producer for this one, but the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg, um, a lot of people expect heaven to be kind of like Whoopi Goldberg in the movie Ghost with things just exploding in front of them. And certainly people do have those experiences. But sometimes it could, most times actually, for most people, it could be quite subtle. So I think really it's learning how to just pay attention, and to not have this kind of just solo focus on, this one particular thing. I mean, that could certainly help, but you'll be missing out on all the other things. So I think it's really important to be in a state of gratitude, first of all, for the signs and symbols that you're getting, or those, God winks, as we call it, from the spirit realm. But also to kind of pick up on the subtlety of things and to live with awareness and to live in a state of gratitude and understanding. Any little thing that you get is a big thing. And it takes, a lot of creativity from the spirit realm to come to us. I mean, they're working over there, and right now it's a little bit easier with all the tech that we have, where they're able to make themselves known, but they're working on different ways to reach us. And I think when I had my NDE, I mean, I really understood how spirits feel on the other side, because when I had my NDE, I was kind of like a spirit basically, in a sense. But I was able to see all the people that were with me in the playground that day, and I just wanted to shake them up and down to let them know that I am still right here. I am better than ever. But I saw they were looking at my body, and that was irresponsive, and that's where they thought that I was. And so I think for people, the first thing is to understand that yes, we have this physical body, but our soul just experiences this body. This body is just a vehicle for expression, and that soul, doesn't, have this physical form. And I think when you're able to understand that, you're able to see that there's a lot more of an ability to access, our loved ones in spirit. They go beyond the physical senses. There's a beautiful story that I always love to share, which is like two people and how people look at the afterlife, and the illustration of the angles that people have. People come from that material reductionist standpoint and people who are able to see this from the spirit, perspective. But there's that beautiful analogy where people are right by a shoreline and you see this beautiful boat going in the distance. And one person just stops and says, wow, that boat is just no longer here. I can't see it anymore. It's beyond the horizon. The other person stops and it's just like, what are you talking about? That boat is still as strong and just as beautiful. I guarantee it. Just because you can't see it with the physical eyes doesn't mean it's still not right there. And I think for people, when connecting to spirit, connecting to loved ones, have to understand that there's a sight that goes just beyond the physical, sight. And there's a love that goes beyond just the love that we had within the body. That love is eternal. And they hear your thoughts, they hear your inner dialogue, they're tuned in to so much of what we're going through. And I think, mediums work in different levels. Some more work on just like a strictly forensic standpoint where they talked about, and people need to hear that. They need to know like how they passed away, stuff like that. But a lot of different mediums are able to tune into their loved ones and how they tune into our everyday stuff and just like say, oh, we saw you, looking out the other day and we heard your conversation. We heard what you were saying, just exactly. So I think that's a lot more comforting to know that they're here with us each step of this journey and we're not alone. Which is, the theme of isolation is another, aspect that I lean into a lot within my work because that's a big, epidemic going on. And I certainly have a story to share on that too, which is, I think, helpful for people to understand.
I think that it's beautiful the lovely way that you just explained that about the ship and how people sometimes don't realize what is right there in front of them, and
Yeah.
they need to zoom in a bit more. And I do feel people are longing for home or for the people that they consider to be home.
Mhm.
And that's why when they're connecting with spirit through a medium and it's a soul centered mediumship experience, they do get that kind of uh, evidence in terms of I was with you the other day when this happened. I
Mhm.
heard what you said. I saw what you did. The joys, the concerns continue to be shared. And I think this helps people to not be so afraid of their own death and disconnection from their own spiritual identity. Because if we're connecting with in a mediumship reading, that is their evidence as well, not just of the person that they love, that their soul has continued on, but each one of us, all of our souls continue on. So I can feel from you that you're not scared of the ultimate, the death concept, just like I'm not. And I think that
Mhm.
really our work and our experiences have lend themselves to that. Before we get into the lonely factor of things, I was wondering if you could perhaps share with people in terms of how they're wanting to access those memories of heaven for themselves. How would they go about doing that?
Mhm.
With
Yeah, I would say in terms of accessing memories, there's many different ways. I mean, certainly, I provide, a service these days called Between Life Soul Regression Therapy, which, for people who haven't really understood that, that was really mainstreamed by an individual named Dr. Michael Newton, who in the late 60s, he was kind of skeptical about themselves, was dealing with a client who was, feeling disenfranchised, was feeling very isolated and fragmented. And so Michael just simply asked the client to go to the direct source, of her own depression and her loneliness. And immediately she was able to describe beings of light who were around her. And she was able to describe her own soul pod, which is beings that we're eternally connected to. Some of them we can incarnate with in this lifetime, and others are still connected over the side. But think of it kind of like a soul team. But then they were able to illustrate this message that, she was feeling this way because a part of her growth had to be independent in this lifetime. That was a big lesson of hers. And she felt so lonely because so many of her loved ones were in heaven on the other side, but she was able to understand that she was meant to be more independent in this life. And that was a part of her soul's growth. That was a part of her soul's theme. And once she was able to understand that she was never alone, that this life was, very much the curriculum, she understood, that everything is an opportunity for her growth. And so, what I take from that is, for people are able to understand, heaven are able to understand this curriculum, that everything is an opportunity for your growth. Every person you encounter, every situation, that's how you're able to really remember to heaven and, being gratitude, having gratefulness. There's a saying that said aptitude, net altitude will define your gratitude. But in a sense, the more, gratitude, not aptitude, I'm sorry, we'll define your altitude. Geez, early in the morning. But in a sense, the more grateful you are, the higher you're able to vibrate. But being in nature, I think too, I find that to be very helpful, just connecting to this higher, frame of consciousness in a way. But between life soul regression really is a direct way for people to remember their own heaven. For years, I've had people come up to me, and I started probably around 2016 talking publicly about my NDE. But one of the first things that people said to me outside of wanting, the book to be written, which, 4 years later, it was published by Water, a company in California, my first book, Life After Breath. But people just said, hey, I want to get to heaven. I want to have an NDE. How do I do it? And I would not encourage people to visit, the now late Dr. Kevorkian, who, had self-induced those kind of things, or to go through physical distress. But what I understood, and this is highlighted by Dr. Michael Newton, is there's a large percentage of our soul, in our own memory that's on the other side, that's continuing over here. Newton, throughout his thousands of regressions, would estimate that around 70 to 90% of our higher awareness is on the other side, and around 15 to 20%, is in this body in this lifetime. And so, through being able to just simply let go, we're able to connect to that higher mind. And so certainly in my NDE, I had my own brain that was completely deprived of oxygen and literally snapped in half. And I felt this tremendously loud crack within my own brain. And that was scary, but also informative to myself and very much congruent with NDE research that will state that, the brain is just simply a filter of this life. It's not a producer of consciousness, if you will. It's simply a filter. And really, what hypnosis does is it allows the brain to get into those deeper states of relaxation where we have, the gamma, the beta, the alpha, the theta, and the delta waves. And so, hypnosis gets you right in between kind of like that theta and that alpha wave brainwave state, which they have found people like yourself who work as evidential mediums or intuitives are able to have, they don't know why, they're able to switch gears very quickly to go from, that gamma, into that, between state and between that, that theta and that alpha state. So it's fascinating why that works, but for the majority of people, you can get to that place, but it takes a little bit longer. And so we, get clients into those more induced states of relaxation. But once they're able to get into those states of relaxation, that's when the mind is able to access a lot more memories that goes beyond this thing. And what, I try to call the spirit channel, or some would call nonlinear states of consciousness versus linear states of consciousness, but they're able to tap in more to the spirit channel and then connect to their memories that go beyond their body. And it's amazing to see and bear witness of.
It's nice if there is some sort of protocol people can go through. So many people are looking for the best practices to help themselves access or to strengthen their connection
Mhm.
with their soul, or even soul memories, or
Right.
heaven. And to your point of the concept that there's this higher self that is existing
Mhm.
in an elsewhere, the layers of the aura definitely connect us with all the different planes of
Mhm.
existence. So we always have that deep, abiding connection with those dimensions. And I think that's one of the access points. But I appreciate the fact that you did mention about nature and getting into those calm states, and hypnosis does have a place with all of that. For people who are looking for any other practices, what would you suggest for them in terms of strengthening that connection?
It's a buzzword these days and something that may put off some people, but meditation, and I don't want to dismiss the value that meditation has. To me, I just call it, well, I think when you're able to meditate and you're able to it's kind of like a muscle. But the more that you're able to do it, you just know that there's a you beyond your thoughts, your emotion, your body. And it's kind of, being intimate with your eternal self. It's connecting to that sacred eternal observer. And so I do believe, obviously, there's hard studies of, what meditation does to the brain and how it's really able to activate the pineal gland and get, the brainwave frequencies into those more relaxed states. But, you know, I think that's, one form of it, but I think that's very important. There's many forms of meditation. There's transcendental meditation, mindfulness meditation. I do believe it's really utilizing what speaks to you, what works with you, and how do you connect. Some people listening to music could be a meditation, and music and sound has different frequencies that allow the brain to get into different, states of awareness. So I think it's really learning and understanding yourself and how in what speaks to you. Life is there's a, objective element to life, but also subjective nature. And I think it's learning and understanding yourself, what speaks to you. But, there's that saying, the quieter become, the more that you could hear. And so, within the brain, what you're doing when you meditate, you're getting your brain into those lower states of vibration to increase your own awareness, your own spiritual vibration. And so, I think really kind of grounding yourself, getting a little bit more quiet, and just connecting also to the breath. When I had my NDE, I mentioned suffocation, and my own human breath was taken from me in every way, shape, and form. But what I learned from that was, yes, we have our own human breath, but also beyond the human breath that we're doing, when we're meditating, we're connecting to the breath of eternity. And when I lost my own human breath, I connected to this eternal breath. And, I come from the Jewish tradition, which, there's a lot of mysticism involved, but the word that's translated for spirit is translated into the wind or the breath of God. It's called ruach, the wind or the breath of God. And so I think what's important is the power of surrender. And that's what I did in my own near-death experience, where I let go of, the suffocation that I was having, and I surrendered to this eternal, state of awareness, this eternal breath that we're all created from. And so when dealing with, different, conflicts, adversity, stuff like that, or just day-to-day stuff, learning how to surrender to the inner flow, learning how to surrender to all the love that you have around you is our greatest strength. That, is not a weakness. I know surrender is very much pathologized, but really that allows us to tap into our greatest strength within. And I experienced that firsthand in my NDEs. So certainly tapping into surrender, meditation, and getting yourself into states of flow, which, is very pivotal to connect to, the other side. And I think being open to being soft, because the other side isn't like so much like a punch to you. It's like this soft, gentle breeze coming through, or this door that's opening up and you're feeling that gentle wind. So I think really learning that soft is really a strong presence, and being sensitive, to those things, I think could help people connect to, their higher realms of awareness.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. Meditation is really about the practice of meditation. It's
Yeah.
not about the rigidity of thought that comes with this idea of meditation. And it's a access point for each one of us. I do feel that we have to find the meditation that's right for us. And you've given people a lot of avenues that they can pursue with the meditation. And I do feel also that these that memories of heaven and memories of who we truly are do come from that surrender. And that surrender is ultimately a trust. That's a trust in the divine, that the infinite is there for us. The universe is supporting us through all things. So there are these specific moments. They could be dreams, they could be meditation, they could be a near-death experience, it could be grief. And
Mhm.
that moment is what takes us to that next level that strengthens our connection with our soul if we let it. And just to answer a question that I know other people will have, listeners are probably, well, how would I discern the difference between my imagination and a genuine spiritual experience or recall? What would you say to those listeners?
I would say, and I even use this in my own, hypnosis scripts, that imagination and intuition are like two sides of the same coin. When you think of this in this reality, like what we're having right now, me being in a chair, going on this web camera on Zoom, was once someone intuitive, idea that they put into fruition. They imagined it, they intuited it, and then it came into fruition. So, you know, everything was once imagined by someone and then that came into reality. And I believe that intuition, is that voice of our imagination. And that, when we act on it, that becomes a physical, becomes the result. Like we said, spirit is eternal life, the mind is the architect, and the physical is the result. And when you're able to really tune into this intuition or just this idea, that imagined idea came from somewhere, didn't come from anywhere, and it came from a source. So I think, for people, I guess to stop, dichotomizing those words and seeing them, as one and the same. Imagination to me is reality. Everything that once was imagined an idea, became a reality. So I would, for me, I don't know your thoughts on that, but I see them, quite at the same accord. I think what gets people but what kind of stops people is their limited sense of self, where they feel, oh, I'm getting this download. That should be like someone who has this big platform and practices fully. Like, who am I for the spirit realm to speak to me? And when I had my near-death experience and I saw my guardian angels, I looked at them as the absolute most beautiful beings that you could possibly imagine. I can't describe how incredible it was to be right with them, right by my side. But what I also learned and saw was the same beauty that you see in something that you view as outside of you is actually a reflection of yourself. And I think that's why people are drawn to nature. They're drawn to beautiful things. But the important thing is to see life as just a reflection of what you have within yourself. And the beauty that you see in something else is reflective of yourself. But I think what stops people is they have this small version of themselves that they have a very hard time letting go of. And you'd ask me like another piece to get to heaven is it's not a destination, but you have to be willing to explore. You have to be willing to challenge the paradigm of this box of the ego. We live on a big planet, and once upon a time, people saw it was just a flat Earth, and someone had this intuitive or imagined idea, whatever you call it, and they said, I don't believe that. I don't believe that to be true. And they started to challenge, this paradigm, this outlook, and they found that that was not the case, and this whole world became a different planet, if you will. And so that could happen on a physical basis. Imagine what happens to the things that we can't see. So I think for people to really expand, you have to be willing to explore. You have to be willing to challenge all the things that you're going to be handed that maybe is not serving your greatest and highest good and has led to a degree of stagnation in your life. So I think it's important to probe and to go further and to listen to that intuitive voice because that brings people to growth. And I believe people are listening to our channel because there's something inside of us that knows there's a lot more that they maybe have taught or have believed, and they're tuning into that voice of their own memory.
And which leads us to, what message do you believe heaven is trying to communicate to people right now?
In this moment, wow, it's crazy. I was like interviewing a guest, and they said there was some like hard documentation of the amount of minutes and hours where there was like documented cohesion on the planet. But in a sense, we've been living, all these thousands of years and have never had, cohesion. And you just have to ask yourself why. And, I have a great colleague. I know she spoke in Lilydale, I think like a year or two ago, named Karen Noe, who is the author of The We Consciousness, which was downloaded by Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Yeah, she
But
was
I
a guest.
think,
People
yeah,
can watch that past show too.
and do watch Karen. I just had a birthday, and Karen. I tell this to her, too. We're born a couple weeks apart. She's an Aries, I'm a Taurus, but I said she's one of the people that come to my forefront in terms of gratitude because she's had such an impact on my life, as a dear friend and dear colleague. And she's just, you want to see an angel in front of you, like, she's it. She's very much an angelic but Karen had this book, Channel from Dr. Dyer's teachings, and it's called the We Consciousness. And I
Mhm.
do believe that really is a big message from the other side, is they want us to get out of this me consciousness and more into the we consciousness. And Karen goes into detail, within that book in terms of some of the different paths and avenues, but I do believe there's a big relationship with beliefs and behavior. And when we're able to see ourselves as interconnected and how what you do to what you perceive to another, you're really doing to yourself, there would be, a much different, uh, set of behaviors that we have. And so I do believe when people are able to shift beliefs, behaviors will change. But I do believe the other side wants us to stop seeing, people outside of us and start to see the interconnectivity that it has. I also believe, in the concept of Jacob's ladder. I don't think my name was there for a reason, and I had mine right by a ladder in a playground. But I would say that's a message from the angel that from rather the spirit realm that spoke to me, which is that many people are climbing different ladders. Some are climbing the solely the material ladder. Nothing wrong with that, but they're not really, their focus is just on putting other people's down to getting ahead. And the spirit ladder is really about being a brothers and sisters keeper. I had my NDE in a playground, which, to me, we're all eternal children in the playground of God. But I think it's really to understanding that, another person's success is our success. And as I say, high tides rise all boats. And I think for ourselves, we have to understand that it's not just about our success, it's about really empowering other people. And so when I do share my near-death experience, part of it is, leading into Jesus' teaching is like the kingdom of heaven me is in you too, but understanding that this was a gift that was given to me. And my goal is to share it away. And I would encourage, that's really what the other side is really stressing for people is if you have a passion, if you have something that you're tuned into, give it over to another. And that will, help that will give that person licensure to do the same, to be themselves, to be unique. In a way, because I do believe each person was not here to just be a leaf in water, but the spirit realm wants us to generate our own current. So it's really about being your unique self and overcoming a lot of the cultural, social learning theories, which, at the time of young age, it says to bog down yourself, to be normal, to fit in. The spirit realm wants you to understand that the paranormal is our normal, and to really connect to that higher self and to be our authentic self. If that's okay. So those are some of the things that I'm getting from the spirit realm, but I don't know if those are things that you're tuning into or tapping into as well.
I think
But to me, those
everybody's
are a
getting
couple
that
things.
similar message. Yeah, definitely. I wanted to maybe give you this opportunity to talk about the lonely factor because I know you mentioned that earlier. Maybe this would be a good place because
Mhm.
you kind of mentioned the Jesus's teaching, the golden rule that helping other people. Let's lean into that, especially as you talk about the lonely people. If there's a listener today that is in that space.
Yeah, and I certainly do believe that pain really fuels purpose. I write about this in my first book, Life After Breath. It's a really powerful story, but you know, um, I'm giving my talk in Lilydale. I just recognized in the sign of cancer, which rules the home, which is very much, this talk is very much about having people come back home. But there was a point in time in my later teenage years, I was still living, in my, family's home, and I have a wonderful relationship with my family right now. They're all, we all have a great dynamic, but they know the story where I was just really acting out, and I was asked to leave the home temporarily, and that's hard, for a lot of people, but to me, it really hit a point, and I was just kind of probing it why. And then I decided to, leave my house, walk around the corner, and I found myself in a playground once again, and I just began sobbing. And I looked at this playground, almost 20 years later when I had my NDE, and it just kind of like dawned on me, like, wow, this having your NDE was in the playground was not a random occurrence. It was, a teaching for other people that we're all, the children of God. We're all here as our brothers and sisters keeper. And this earth is just a temporary dwelling place, but our real home is, in our hearts and is in our connection to our other people. And we're able to be connected to other people. We're able to find, ourselves and, our interconnectivity. But really, to really for people to feel less alone, it's to understand that we don't walk this path alone. We have so much love around us. That was a big lesson that I got for my NDE is just how much support, how much love is around us at all times. And sometimes we walk forward with these, lonely thoughts, and we have like this box in reality because we see this body who may not be connected to people in this physical realm. We think this is all that there is, but the spirit realm is deeply connecting us. They hear every thought, they watch our every move. And I think it's important to remove this illusion, of isolation, that we live a very much a connected life, but it's a lot of people have this hard belief within themselves, and it's a big vulnerability to let that sense of identity go. But I do encourage people to really reflect on the goals that they have in their life. And, if their goals is to, be connected or disconnected, and to understand what's going to be productive towards that goal and what's going to, get you disaligned. It's like you have a beautiful destination to go to and you're traveling in the water, and then these kind of like these monsters that come up in the water. If you feed those things, that's going to take you away of the life that you want to live, the place you want to go to. So I think for other people, it's to recognize that things may have justification, things may, be really true to you. And also, and I use the word and because I do believe two truths can coexist, what's going to be helpful to really lean into in the life that you want to live and the person that you want to become. And so I do believe the quality of our life becomes a quality of our focus. And we're shifting our focus, we're shifting our life. But that starts with the belief. And I do believe if people are feeling, lonely and isolated, it's just asking spirit, communicating with their loved ones, asking for those winks, those signs. When you're very specific, they will show up, but you have to be able to be in a position of asking. But I once interviewed Neil Donald Walsh, about like 3 times on my channel, and we was talking about when he was getting his downloads from the other side, from God, as he calls it. God came to him when he was doing this automatic writing, when Neil was just kind of like lamenting to God, and God is like, "Do you really want to know, or you just want to lament?" And Neil says, I want to be sure as hell that this is true." And God is like, "Wouldn't it be better to be sure as heaven?" So, in a sense, we have to sometimes ask ourselves if we're just lamenting or do we really want these answers? Yes, I think that's important to distinguish.
I think that's an excellent point because people, when they've gotten to a place where they feel that they are a victim of circumstance or situations with people, you can feel like you're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak,
Mm,
right? And you feel like can't I come back in? Can I
mhm,
return? Or can I find something that is enriching? And that first comes with changing our words and our attitude and how
mhm,
we are dealing with things. There's a reframing that has to go on so that you can successfully engage and reignite
mhm,
and rethread with the grace that is all around you. And I do feel that that story you just shared with us is in your youth, as you felt
mhm.
um, kicked out. You felt that you were,
Disenfranchised from this
yeah,
from this from this earth plane. I felt like I
yeah,
had no home. But it just reminded me that, this home is a temporary dwelling place. Our real home, our true home is in the depths of our hearts. We can never leave it. We're eternally connected to it. And I do believe Spirit wanted myself to experience that, to maybe, personally be able to relate to other people in my line of work, dealing with that, but also to invite possibility, that this isn't the only place, and our real dwelling home was never truly here. And we always have, a seat in heaven. We're always connected to that. And, so I think that's important to bear in mind. But yeah, a lot of people who have NDEs come back feeling a degree of homesickness. And, that's really where tools come into play and people able to connect that same energy while they're here, it is important to recognize that we can never leave it. And that part of us is eternally still over there. We're not just in this physical body. We're still existing on that plane. And oftentimes in dream states, things of that nature, consciousness expands. We're able to, move on just beyond just this linear reality and go into that spirit channel. And there's many different pathways to that spirit channel. But I do believe it really starts, from connecting to within and, getting quiet and just, tuning into something a little bit different. But, that's also teaching of the wisdom of Jacob's ladder, where I don't believe that, I had the name Jacob by random circumstance, but Jacob, biblical Jacob was having this proverbial and near-death experience where his brother was chasing him and he was running for his life. And he had this incredible dream where he slept on a bed of rocks, I do believe, which most chiropractors won't, co-sign to, but that was, different time and place. But, when he was having this dream, he was seeing the angels going up and down the ladder. He saw the angels at the very top, but also they're at the very bottoms of the rungs of the ladder, which really speaks to the angelic realm. Yes, they could feel like they're infinite miles away, but they're also right here. And I experienced that firsthand in my NDE, where the all the angels that we're seeing is just a little shift above this reality. It's a tiny little fraction of a dial, and they're floating all around us at all times. We just don't see it. And so I think, within Jacob's ladder, I do believe the higher you go, the more that you can see, and that really speaks to our own frequencies. And our, spirit frequency really increases when you're in a state of joy, gratitude, and you're able to just, see things in a fuller way. When you're very hyper focused on, all these things aren't working, stuff like that, that becomes your reality. So, in this, I don't believe in a heaven and hell, but I do believe that those could be states of consciousness. And the more connected you are to the light, the more that you feel heaven. The more separate you are, the more they could, feel that hellish-like state. And very little of it has to do with what happens to you. I see people all the time who have every single reason to feel like this earth is a hell, but they experience a heaven. And it really has to do with that space between stimuli and response and the freedom within, as Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl alluded to in Man's Search for Meaning. So really, all of life is very much subjective, and we all have that space in between where we could experience that eternity, that heaven. We just have to be able to see it and recognize it.
Yeah, beautiful reminders about our own divine origin. And I want to share with people the upcoming workshop you're going to do here in Lilydale. You'll be back this summer for 2026. And I will have in the show notes a direct ticket link to that. It's going to be Connecting to Your Memories of Heaven, the same as the title of our episode. Jacob will be here on June 23rd in the afternoon to teach his workshop. Do you want to tell folks a little bit about that workshop?
Yeah, yeah, and it was very specific with the language that I used. I firmly believe whether you had a near-death experience or not, or whether you've had direct transformative experiences or not, memory is a wonderful gift that gauges interest and curiosity to all these things. And so during, this particular workshop, I will be sharing, my own near-death experiences, some of the lessons involved, as well as highlighting different transformative experiences, naming them, and there's perhaps people in the audience that for the first time will know, oh my God, I had this. And so I believe name it, tame it kind of thing. And that was a big transformative element in my life when I was able to really concretize my, experience that had a name. It was a near-death experience and coined by in my dear friend Dr. Imam Moody. By the way, I think he's also a Cancerian too. I think his birthday is either July 2nd or July 4th, something like that. I
Yes,
call him
he's in
every
July. Yes.
I call him, but when you think of Cancer, ruling the house, ruling the home,
He loves
it's
being
like
called around his birthday. He loves it.
I call him every year.
Yeah.
Um, I could do his voice, but I want to, I want to be respectful. But he's got a beautiful Southern, kind of voice. But yes, I mentioned that because cancer rules the home, and as Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. And he's talk about a guy who, has helped people remember their own heaven, their own eternity, and didn't come without, career risks and stuff like that. And it was very much without ridicule and all those things. But he took the hits, but he absolutely changed his planet. But yes, we'll be highlighting a lot of different transformative experiences and spelling those out. In addition, like I said, my NDE, the lessons involved in it, and also we're going to be doing a between life soul regression, at the second half of it. And so I believe that spirituality is a participation sport where everyone has the ability to connect. It's not for the select few. There's no VIP kind of things when it comes to heaven. We all, have that divine internal spark within. And so, people will be doing this group regression where they'll be able to connect to the most fundamental questions that people have on the innermost basis, which is who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? And where do I go when the body, leaves me? Stuff like that. And so between life soul regression is a very direct way to help people to remember the blueprints that they had before they got here, as well as their own direct source of their memories of heaven and the spirits and souls that they're connected to. And, it's profound, it's transformational. And yeah, this work is very much kind of like that Picasso quote, the meaning of life to find our gift, the purpose of it is to give it away. And the beautiful thing about living in these days is we have a lot of challenges, but we have so many cutting edge tools to support people's journey and to really improve their lives. And I do give Michael Newton so much credit for really mainstreaming this modality to allow people to connect to the same memories that I had in my NDE without all that trauma and stress that I experienced. And hopefully they could walk out of this with a lot more clarity within themselves and the life they're going to be living moving forward.
Fantastic. And again, that will be on June 23rd of this summer season, 2026. So go ahead and get your tickets now and make your plans to be here in Lilydale. That's going to be a beautiful week. It'll be the first full week of Lilydale, actually, because Lilydale opens up on June 19th this year. So it'll be a 10-week summer season with lots of workshops, classes, message events, healing events, everything. And you can find out more information about that on the lilydaleassembly.org website. Jacob, where is a good place for them to find you if they want more about your books, your teaching, your upcoming events?
Contrary to what a lot of people say around me, I'm still living on planet Earth. I'm not, in the angelic realm. I'm still here. I live in Long Island, New York. Very grounded guy for people actually who know me. I love sports. I love food. I love nature. I love exercise. All those things help me to really embrace this walk in the physical, as I say. But you can find me at jacoblcooper.com. That's my website, and there you can find all my social media handles. Jacob Cooper LCSW, Facebook, Instagram. I try to have daily posts that just come to me that need to be heard. But yeah, for anyone, I give both, in-person sessions as well as remote sessions for psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, Reiki, do spiritual counseling. And I also educate, fellow therapists to better understand these types of things and really dichotomize, psychotic episodes versus psychic experiences and spiritual phenomena to help empower and discern, clients, because that could be, definitely a shift in people's lives. And if anyone wants to learn directly about a dichotomy of a psychotic episode versus a spiritual phenomenon, do watch Wolf's Message by Suzanne Giesemann, available on Amazon. Wonderful movie that really highlights this, phenomenon in a beautiful way. So,
And that is such a great movie. It actually premiered here in Lilydale,
yep.
and we were so happy to have her back in Lilydale and what a beautiful experience of evidential mediumship and the far-reaching effects that love never dies. And so yes, I would definitely give that another thumbs up from me. That documentary, it's really just a delightful one, and there is wonderful. There's so many resources out there for people. And just to your point, I do have a show about spiritual emergence. If anybody wants to look that up on the YouTube channel, goes into depths about spiritual emergence, and there's a whole network that's involved with that, along with Jacob. He has his own, so just know there are different resources out there for you, so you can understand the differences and really lean into the spiritual understanding of your life. So thank you, Jacob, for being on the show today. We really appreciate you joining us. And thank you, all of our listeners, for today. We've really enjoyed this beautiful and deeply nourishing conversation with Jacob Cooper. His insights remind us that the love and the peace and the clarity we associate with heaven are not distant. They're woven into who we are. So if today's episode stirred something within you, trust that, explore that, and let it guide you back to your own inner knowing. Until next time, I'll see you on Wednesdays with Willa for another great episode with another great guest. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.